allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I shall now ask Secretary Meyer to call the roll, and when your name is called, if you have any concerns about a conflict of interest with anything on the agenda this evening, would you please announce that so that we can deal with your potential conflict of interest? Secretary Meyer?
I'll start to my right with Commissioner Straub,
Present, none.
Commissioner Barry,
Present, none.
Commissioner Hurd,
Present, none.
Commissioner Smith,
Present, none.
and Chairman Birch.
Present and none.
And I am present and I have none.
Thank you.
But as of now, Ms. Abbott is not present.
Thank you, Secretary Meyer. Does anyone have any concerns or changes they desire to make to the agenda? Hearing none, the floor will entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll move, Mayor.
Support. It has been moved by Secretary Mayer, supported by Commissioner Straub, that we approve the agenda as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Motion carries. The agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is public comment on anything that is not on the agenda. We do have members of the public available this evening. Do you, either of you, care to address the planning commission? Please announce your name, address for the record, sir.
Joseph Spiegel.
Joe, can you make sure that that microphone is on? There is should be on top, there's a button. Is it green? Thank you.
Joseph Spiegel, 7905 Sour Gregory. I want to thank the commissioners. I want to shout out to the Fletcher for his report, which was terrific. Really good work. I have 6 quick questions. One, how did this get on the agenda and why did it get on the agenda? At whose suggestion? I don't expect answers. How many data centers has our expert represented? 3, how much has this cost us so far, including staff time? Who would Dexter Township hire as our expert and what would be the cost? Is there going to be a survey relating to data centers and what is the cost to the environment versus the benefit to the residents? I noticed that pages 3 through 51 dealt with a training session, but starting at page 52, it focuses on data centers. And I'm not quite sure why. On page 91, there is a fairly robust analysis of the pros and cons of data centers. And on pages 100 and 102, there's a discussion of the potential tax benefits. And as far as I know, there are no proposed data centers in Dexter Township. There is one local data center, TS Data Center, but I couldn't find any information about them. And I haven't looked up any state information. So I don't expect answers. I've raised these issues. As the commissioners are aware, I'm always trying to be objective. There's pros and cons to everything. I'm just confused about why this particular planning and zoning basic and focuses on data centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel. Now, I do have a couple of comments, not to answer your question directly, But because data centers are on the agenda this evening, I would have given you time to ask these questions during
Oh,
our
okay.
discussion of data centers.
I apologize.
And not a problem, sir. And the second comment is because we have been following the activities and the applications for data centers in other neighboring townships and cities in southeast Michigan with discussion with Mr. Reiher, we decided to put this onto the agenda as soon as possible so Dexter Township can deal with this issue. So we are not dealing from a position of response, but rather dealing with it as a planning commission from a position of we have analyzed the issue and hopefully we will have developed a process and the appropriate zoning to deal with it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, sir.
If I can ask, did that answer your question? Because I actually asked that it be at least touched on during the meeting because of all the news stories about what's going on in Saline, and then there's one in Howell, and I know when we did the renewable energy ordinance, we were sort of under the wire to get that done. And I just felt like this should be, this is coming up, like, I don't know that there's any been proposed in and maybe we should say this for later, I'm sorry.
That's not a problem,
Okay.
Secretary Meyer.
Just that, I don't know that any have been, but we do have some big chunks of open farmland out there near the transmission lines, which is a little bit of a concern if someone proposed one out there. So just to echo Chair Bursch's comments, to be ready to go as opposed to just, trying to struggle with a response when if it did come up.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Secretary Meyer. Proceeding along, is there anyone else who cares to address public comment session this evening on any item not on the agenda? Hearing none, we have no public hearing on the agenda this evening. We have no action items on the agenda this evening. Our first discussion item will be a planning and zoning basics training presentation from Ms. Mazon-Minnick, who is with Carlisle Wharton and Associates. And Ms. Mazon-Minnick, I will turn the floor over to you as soon as I turn out the lights.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
This is not to enhance sleeping, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to answer the question from the public, we provide a training as part of our retainer. Every year we ask our clients, how would you like it structured, and talking to the supervisor and Mr. Reiher that we said planning and zoning basics because we got a couple of new planning commissioners. But then also if last week, 2 weeks ago, Secretary Meyer emailed about data centers, and a colleague of mine had put together a presentation on data centers. And so that got melded in. So without further ado, so it's at no extra cost to the township.
Love to hear that.
So what we're gonna do is to briefly talk about what is planning, the master plan and the zoning ordinance, which are two different things. Roles and responsibilities that you planning commissioners have, but also other people within the township and especially those other appointed boards. How to make effective decisions, and then discussion on data centers. So what is planning? Planning is looking out and seeing what your vision is for your community, and then having a roadmap to get there. So, and the reason I put up the picture in back of planning there, that's from your master plan, and those indicate the different categories of future land uses that you're looking to have in your township, and how they should scale out, where they should be, and whatnot. And the planning commission is really charged by state law to be the main entity that writes and drafts the master plan. And the planning commission is appointed by local officials, so you were selected for a reason, and that is to guide the future of your community. Now, you're appointed rather than elected to give you a buffer. Because you're gonna grapple with some hard decisions. And then especially with things like data centers or renewable energy, there's a lot of community input that comes back and forth that a directly elected board may not always be able to cope with. And that's the reason for having it being an appointed official. Is that there's some insulation from the public, but also your charge is to listen to the public and to balance a whole bunch of different factors. So your authority comes through 2 state acts. So I know we have at least one lawyer in the crowd. So if you want to go back to the enabling legislation, there's the Michigan Planning Enabling Act and the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. And Michigan Planning Act enables the establishment of the Planning Commission, assigns duties, talks a lot about what a master plan is and how it should be done, and other forms of planning are enabled also in that act. The Michigan Zoning Enabling Act enables the development of a ordinance and the administration of that. And actually in the Zoning Enabling Act, it talks about a zoning commission, which can be the planning commission. And there used to be, when I first started out in planning, yeah,
Ms. Mason, could we take a short break? One of the commissioners has a personal issue she'd like to deal with.
absolutely.
Thank you.
This will only take 1 minute
Okay.
or less. All right, Paula.
Thank you, Ms. McKinnick.
All right, I'm back. And also for folks who are watching at home or maybe watching this later, these slides are in the Planning Commission's packet. That's available at the website. As I was saying, when I started my career, actually, there was the Village Enabling Act, a Village Planning Enabling Act, a Cities and Villages Planning Enabling Act, a County Enabling Act, and a Township Enabling Act for planning and zoning. So you had like 6 different acts. Actually, we all carried around this really big white book. So they all got slimmed down into one in 2008, 2009. And there's some peccadillos in that law if that you may go through if you are somebody who reads them and they're like, why is there a specific rule for this village thing? It's because they consolidated all three acts. So the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, again, creates you to be here, your main charge, which is creating adopting plans. Also, it charges you with looking at capital improvement plans. So a township like Dexter Township, you don't have a lot of capital improvements. But if you do one, the Planning Commission should review it and recommend it by state law. A lot of communities kind of skip that one over. Either they don't have that capital improvements, or a lot of times a much bigger city that's sequestered into their DPW, which sometimes it's hard to wrest from those hands. Also public improvement approvals, and then subdivision regulations and reviews. So mostly, again, back in the 90s, those were plats. But now it's site condominiums is the main way that land is divided into subdivisions. And that's surely through your zoning ordinance and those standards that you have in there. The Zoning Enabling Act, and it has the drafting and adopting of the zoning ordinance, again, talks about establishing planning commissions. Gives the parameters for how notifications and whatnot happen for rezonings and conditional rezonings. So rezoning is a change of the zoning map from one zoning category to another. A conditional rezoning, which we'll go into a little later, is where the applicant brings conditions forward and the township either accepts or denies. it's one of those rare instances where you as the township can't impose any conditions, but the applicant can. And so it's kind of a one-way street. And then zoning approvals, so special land uses, which those are usually for uses which need a little extra scrutiny and public input, so they're gonna have an impact. Typically, those are gas stations. You made them for the renewable energy, that's a special land use. And then whatnot. They also have site plan review and then plan unit developments. Site plan review is an administrative approval, and we'll talk a little later about how that's different than a special land use, which is discretionary approval. And then a planned unit development is the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act enables a municipality to have that in their zoning ordinance, which is really an opportunity for zoning to be flexed in order for community benefit. And it's also for those special snowflakes that just don't fit a lot of times. It allows open space preservation and purchase of development rights. The way that it enables the purchase of development rights is through that planned unit development or PUD, allowing that there's community benefits or benefits that are off-site from where the development is. So in most cases, you couldn't take something from another property that's not owned by the person who is the applicant and transfer it and do something off-site there, but you can within a PUD. And so that's where the transfer of development rights would happen. And then the purchase of development rights is like your, what's your purchase of development rights committee called? Farmland and open space. And then it also, the Zoning Enabling Act sets up the Zoning Board of Appeals. And they are exactly what it says. They're the appeals body. For when the rules don't fit, they can give an exception, and that is called a variance. Other legislation, because it is not just those two acts. So there are other local ordinances. And sometimes it's better to have those ordinances outside of the zoning ordinance, such as if it's something that is a performance standard that you want to have happen, or that you don't want it to run with the land. Because any zoning approval runs with the land, and that means whoever owns it still gets whatever rights or approvals that were given to it before. But for something like when you were looking at the short-term rental ordinance, that license, that was another ordinance outside because you wanted that to be able to be revoked if you had a bad actor. Which is much easier to do that with what's called a police powers ordinance or a nuisance ordinance rather than in a zoning ordinance. Also, state laws come into play, and a lot of it has to do with preemption. So we've talked a lot about renewable energy and how that state law in some ways preempts local approval, but there's also preemption for public schools. There is a preemption in the state law also for childcare homes and adult foster homes. You have to allow them wherever you allow residential use. There are federal laws that come into play, like RLUIPA, which is Religious Land Uses and Institutionalized Persons Act. And the way it's affected a lot of municipalities is that whenever a place of worship has something that's central to their central to their faith, that can't be seen as a nuisance or necessarily also not be allowed on the land. So ringing of bells, call to prayer could violate noise ordinances, but also it's been stretched at some points to say, okay, we have a soup kitchen here every Tuesday. That's part of our that's part of our mission, but that may not be necessarily zoned for that, and so there's a tension. There's also case laws, county facilities that mostly deals with jails, the family definition, City of Ann Arbor, I know, with students, that's a big sticking point. What is a family? Has been well contested in court, and also you'll see me get very nervous about signs and sexually sexual uses, let's just say, because there's just been a lot of adult sexual uses. There's just been a lot of litigation around those and freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So that case law, sometimes you might see myself or Fletcher cite that and bring that into discussion where you weren't expecting it. Also, there's Attorney General opinions at state of Michigan. Whoever's in office does offer opinions, and those can change land uses. And that specific thing that's example that we usually cite is like condominiums. Because at first that wasn't seen, it was an AG opinion that really solidified that that's a way that you can split land and you don't have to go through the Plat Act. Which is, this site condominium is usually 1 or 2 looks, the plat is at least 3. Any questions? All right, so we've gone through the legal framework and what's all of the things that are on paper and whatnot that are creating your framework for decision making, but these do not operate in a vacuum. And I've seen you as a board experience this, because mandates come down from the township board and they want you to address things. Or you decide to make a decision that comes up to the planning commission, or I have seen your zoning board of appeals do exactly what they should and say, hey, we're not going to grant this variance, but we see a hole in the zoning ordinance. We're going to ask you, planning commission, to fill it. And then you have administrative and support staff supporting, running around behind the scenes a lot of times. But also, if you think about it, the township board has a lot of power in terms of what happens at the planning commission level, because they're the ones who appoint you. They are also the ones who adopt any ordinances. They can be involved in some zoning reviews. And then they also set your budget, your personnel. It's optional for a township board to approve the master plan, but your township board has chosen to do that. And there's another, myriad of policy decisions that they weigh in on that will affect you and will affect the decisions that become before you. But mostly those have to deal with the master plan, zoning ordinance, subdivisions, and your subdivisions, as I said, will likely be site condos, so that goes back to the zoning ordinance, and zoning reviews. And the zoning board of appeals, they deal with variances, so again, those exceptions to the rules, but also they're the appeal body. So I'm sure it would never happen that somebody would question one of Fletcher's decisions. They have the ability, anyone who feels that either you as the planning commission or Fletcher is the director of planning and zoning, or any member of the township that's made a zoning decision, they can appeal that to the zoning board of appeals. And they have certain parameters that they have to look at through there. The zoning board of appeals also does interpretations, and sometimes they are assigned other duties. Especially if you have an ordinance that's outside, like for signs that's outside the zoning ordinance, the zoning board of appeals might be the appeals body for that. And it differs from township to township, municipality to municipality. So any questions on how the interrelationships before we move on to what's a master plan? So basically your master plan is your dream of what you want to become. And that is a general statement of goals and policies, but you put it in a single comprehensive document. It should serve as a daily decision-making guide. So that's something that Fletcher should have on his shelf and be able to pull out and look at it. But it also provides the basis on which you make your decisions, and the township board would make their decisions, and possibly the ZBA. And a lot of times from our clients, we get, well, why do we even need to do this? We all know what we want. It's, and a lot of times it's that they want things to remain the same. Well, sometimes it's to anticipate change, because just as you've seen tonight with data centers and new land uses and things coming on, change is sometimes the only constant. And so to look to create predictability in that type of arena. Also for you to use your resources wisely, whether those are economic, physical, natural, social, fiscal. And then it's an opportunity for you to create a vision for the future. And I know you just did a big push with your last master plan update that was adopted in terms of having community engagement, and you really nailed down on a couple of pillars that you want to center the township on. So you probably don't need to do a big push with community engagement, talking to a lot of people for another 7 to 10 years. But if you're looking to, but there might be some shocks that come along or changes in the township, such as if somebody's going to sell a big piece of land, that may necessitate or may say, hey, we should really maybe dig into this a little bit more. Or there's also the ability to amend your plan to change a smaller part, and then the process can get a little shorter. But and again, it's also to protect the environment and quality of life. And that's based on your resources, your assets, and your limitations. So you'll see in master plans, there's a lot of mapping, and you have maps of your agricultural soils, of where all your natural features are, what the quality of those are. And then also there's some limitations to your road system that you couldn't necessarily support a large subdivision again, unless there were some road improvements. And then also you're on well and septic. So that really does limit some of the ways that you can develop. But then there's also the character of the community. A lot of people talk about rural character, and then you have lakes character too. And I'm sure it varies from lake to lake in terms of what that character is and whatnot. And so knowing what that is, trying to dig down into what makes that is helpful. Then you can craft policies to support it. And it's also the needs and desires of the residents. So that's why also it's worthwhile to have some deep community engagement, usually at least once a decade. And the act says that you should update it, evaluate your plan as to whether it needs to be updated at least once every 5 years. So elements of a master plan that are mentioned in Public Act 33. So are up here: transportation, land use, recreation, capital facilities, special areas. Housing is a new addition to the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, where it is says that you should look at housing and the different housing types that you have. And then also evaluate whether just single family residential is appropriate, essentially. And then it also says that the Planning Commission should be comprised of people representing the diversity of housing that's in your community. Elements of a master plan, as I mentioned before, these are all screenshots of your master plan. So you can see that you've got a prosperity index there that talks about employment and poverty and education. So you can see just a snapshot there of how your community compares to Washtenaw County and Michigan and the United States. There's a future land use map. That future land use map is that guide, that parcel by parcel guide in terms of decision making, and then other descriptive and exploratory matter. And for our firm, what we really, our planning process, if you will, is the 3 whats. Just asking the community first, what's important to you? And then the so what. So why are these issues important? And digging down, really digging down into some of the complexities of them. And now what? So now what do we need to do? And that more is about implementation and steps forward. When should you update your master plan? I think I've been, talked a little, previewed this a bit, is just to update it as needed. It's a fluid document. There's changes in conditions all the time. There's things you can't predict, like a pandemic, a global recession. A lot of times, especially if financing changes, the whole landscape of development changes. But at least every 5 years, take a critical look, because that's required by state law. In terms of using the plan, you as planning commissioners, every time you have a zoning decision, that's something that you should pull out. Know what the future land use is for the site plan that you're looking at. Also, if you're looking at capital infrastructure improvement plans, and also, if you, have any cooperative planning, there might be instances where City of Dexter does cooperative planning with Dexter Township. Or some of your other surrounding townships, you do something joint. Again, that might mostly deal with farmland preservation. So how does that master plan affect zoning decision-making? So if you go to the act, it'll say the zoning ordinance shall be based on a plan designed to promote public health, safety, and general welfare. And health, safety, and general welfare are your foundations for planning and zoning. And the implications are if the plan is out of date, it just weakens the validity of your master plan. And if you get into court, that presumption of validity, and you could actually have the zoning ordinance invalidated or any decision that's made under the zoning ordinance. And so an instance of this is the US Supreme Court made a ruling on signs a number of years ago now, almost 10 years ago, where it said if you have to read the sign to know what the sign is, that's a violation of freedom of speech. So every single zoning ordinance that said real estate sign or election sign was out of date. And then it could be presumed to be invalid. So that was how a court case came into play. But if your plan is not updated, it's not helpful. And just, another instance is Saline Township is one of our clients. They've settled with the data center, a data center case. The main reason that their lawyer encouraged them to settle is he felt that they were vulnerable because they had not planned or zoned for any industrial land within their township. And obviously they hadn't planned for a data center. So he felt like if that got into court, then that was enough of an opening. So let's talk about the master plan's relationship to the zoning ordinance. The master plan is long range. Typically, you're looking out 10, 20 years. The zoning ordinance is immediate. It's right now. We're using it. I mean, I'm sure you answered a zoning question today.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, I've never seen it.
The master plan is guidance. I often joke, it's kind of like, who's seen the Pirates of the Caribbean? Okay, so they talk about the Pirates Code, and that how it's really not a code, it's more of a guideline. That's the master plan. It's more of a guideline, because things will change, and you need to flex sometimes. If you are in that situation though, you need to make findings about why the situation has changed so much from when the master plan was last updated. And again, the zoning ordinance is regulatory. So this is your local law. Your master plan is a policy. And then again, the zoning ordinance is something that you enforce. So the master plan is a may, might, it would be nice. And the zoning ordinance is a shall, must, shall not. So what's a zoning ordinance? Are we ready to jump into that? Right. So it must be, as I said, based on a plan. The zoning regulations run with the land. Again, as owners transfer, what zoning approvals happened, transfer with that ownership. So you recently had the marina change ownership. Anything that previous owner had in terms of their special land use, that then runs with the land, and the new owner has those rights, but also has any conditions of approvals or limitations that came with that. The zoning decisions are permanent unless they're temporary by nature. There's a few of them. Mineral extraction is one of them. Also in that conditional rezoning, that's the only place where you are allowed to have a sunset clause in. So this use will go on for X number of years or until these circumstances happen. And the ordinance may provide for expiration of approvals if not acted upon, and we feel like this is a best practice to have this in there. I think your zoning ordinance does, because it's fairly new for almost everything, and so that if someone hasn't pulled a building permit in 18 months, that they can either appeal to extend it, or it lapses. But that's one of the things also that I know that you track in Township Hall by property with site plans, because I know I've been one of the people who is calling a former applicant and saying, hey, you haven't put anything in the ground yet. You know, what would you like to do? Purposes of zoning is to protect property values, but also to protect natural resources, prevent nuisances, ensure land use compatibility, and ensure basically that you have the services that can support the land uses. Now, sometimes these act counter to one another. So that's why you have an interesting job. But then also it's, how things are phrased and how things are balanced within your zoning ordinance will describe your values. So and it's describing what you want to see in what circumstances. And those future uses in terms of services, those can be anything from roads, in cases where you have sewers, are the pipes big enough, things like that, and whatnot. But also you should be communicating, if you're looking to grow, communicating with the schools, things like that. And then police and fire are also services. You have, as I mentioned before, you have non-discretionary approvals. A lot of those happen at the zoning administration level, so at the director of planning and zoning. When a new single family house build comes in, whether it's something that's demolished or it's on a vacant lot, there's a 3-4 page checklist of zoning things that Fletcher goes through in order to make sure that it complies with all your ordinances and all your zoning ordinances. You get to approve site plans. They come to you. That's an administrative non-discretionary approval. And essentially what that means, if it meets all the requirements, you have to approve it. No matter how much it may pain you, you should approve it. If it meets all the rules. So a lot of times, and also like when we're talking about looking at maybe doing something for data centers, to say, okay, if it was a non-discretionary approval, then if it met everything, we don't have any discretion to look at it. There's some circumstances there. For site plan review, those review standards must be in the ordinance, and you have good ones. The uses and activities listed requiring site plan approval. Standards for decisions, again, you have that, and the application and review process, and then state the approving body or the official, because the approving body could be director of planning and zoning, could be you. I work with a lot of municipalities that have their elected body as the entity that approves site plans. That is not best practice. And so really though, when you're making these decisions, you absolutely should deliberate amongst yourselves, but you need to use those standards that are listed in the zoning ordinance. And so if you have a little cheat sheet to save out of this, for your next site plan, I would pull this up. Just ask yourself, are all the review standards and ordinance met? And I'm going to emphasize all. And so, because if they don't meet all of them, you could make findings on that. But unless it states all in the standards when it introduces it, you don't necessarily have to. There may be a little wishy-washiness in there. Does the plan represent reasonable and workable site arrangement? And then also know that the approval may lapse and extensions may be granted. So if you are looking at something and think, oh, they're not gonna get this built in 18 months, know that they do have the ability for extension. And remember, if all those standards are met, you've got to approve it. Now, there are things called special land uses. And they may be permitted in a particular zoning district subject to prior approval by the municipality. And approval must be based on affirming decision of facts for, and now in caps, all decision criteria in section 2805. So all of those need to be met. And the basis for the approval should be clearly spelled out in the motion or for approval or denial. You get a good, I think, listing from your staff in terms of making those motions and having options. But for special land use, whether you're approving or denying, it's a good idea to list out what those findings are. Because I've seen it with the special land use, especially just recently in Highland Township, who's another one of my clients. Sheets came in, Sheets gas station, special land use was approved. A gas station 2 doors down sued saying that they made an unfair decision. And so having those findings in the motion of an approval is sometimes just as important as having them in a denial. So another thing that I know you guys have all experienced, I think here, is a text amendment. And that can be initiated by an individual who lives in the township, the legislative bodies of the township board, or you, the planning commission. Once it's requested, it begins with you, and they can cover implementing the master plan, clarifying existing language, adding new language. And a lot of times the clarification in the new language come because there's been case law or a new type of land use coming through and that you want to be prepared for. Rezonings, again, these are the map amendments, and we discussed them before. That can be, again, the same thing, individual requests, legislative body, or planning commission. It always begins with you. These are the factors that you need to consider directly from your zoning ordinance. Is it compatible with the master plan? And when I say with the master plan, it's not only that future land use plan, but you also should look at the goals and objectives. And typically in our letters, we'll pull out the goals and objectives that we feel are relevant for you to look at. Because again, if those circumstances have changed and it's a guide, it might I had a circumstance where something within a neighborhood had been zoned retail since 2009. And they wanted to change it to multiple family. And originally in 2009, when they put in that commercial, it was thought it's going to be a nice little neighborhood place where people could walk to or whatnot. But if you think about how we shop and how it's changed since 2009, that was something we put in our review to say how people have changed in the demand for in-person shopping has changed since then. And that was one thing, though, when we looked and we went to a goal or objective where it said to only have the appropriate amount of land uses for retail that the market just could support. We had some things that were misaligned, and so asked the planning commission to look at that. And then tried to clean that up when we just did a new master plan with them update. Also looking at the compatibility with the property itself. And so sometimes this is it big enough? You shouldn't rezone something that doesn't meet the minimum lot size or the minimum lot width. Rezone it to something where it wouldn't meet. Also, its compatibility with the area and whether it's supported by infrastructure and services. So a conditional rezoning. Who's gone through a conditional rezoning? Okay, this is kind of like a unicorn. So it's a voluntary offer by the applicant. It cannot be required as part of the rezoning. So a lot of times you'll have conditions of approval on a site plan or special land use, not on a conditional rezoning. They offer it. So if you all know the Encore Theater in Dexter, that was a conditional rezoning. to allow that use there. So they, and I forget what I think they rezoned it to village commercial. But they had to come with very specific things about how they were gonna make their operation come. And I knew it was very hard for the Dexter City Planning Commission not to say, we want this, this, and this. Back, because they had to say yes or no. And so those officers typical restrict the use or the development. So I think in the case of the Encore Theater, it was that we're gonna be a theater or a civic gathering space. And we're not gonna have any multiple family, and we're not gonna have any retail that's above a certain square footage. They also made some offers in terms of how they would deal with parking. In order for the community to feel a little better that you're not gonna have cars parking all over, especially on 4th Street where it's not curb and gutter and people might be parking on the lawns. It's in the right of it. Anyway, after a certain time, also in this is when you can have that sunset or reverts. That didn't happen with the Encore Theater, but I remember one in Ypsilanti Township where they wanted to have a tennis center, and they said if we hadn't built it in 5 years, the rezoning's gone, it reverts to what it was zoned before. And then you have a good process and decision criteria in section 3004. And so this is a good zoning tool for something where this is probably, someone called me and in their semi-rural township, they have a golf course. The golf course wants to put in a driving range, but also 8 duplexes. But it's zoned rural residential. So we thought, oh, maybe and the duplexes do make sense. Because they have a lot of aging population. So we said, well, maybe they have a conditional rezoning that very much limits their density to 8 units. And then the township could look at it. So then that's the staff then talking to the applicant to say, do you want to make this offer? It should go that way. But I could see that that might be something that could happen here. All right, we're gonna jump into zoning board of appeals. Who's been on the zoning board of appeals? Okay, yeah, okay, so almost a quorum. So they're a quasi judicial body after, if the property owner is not pleased after the zoning board of appeals, their next step is circuit court. They meet as needed, they meet pretty often here. And then also, responsibilities again are interpretations, appeals of decisions and variances. And I will again compliment your zoning board of appeals. They not every municipality has the discipline that that body has, and especially with the amount of different variances that they look at due to the lakes. After 20 years, that's the only ZBA that I've seen that is, I think, meets what's intended. But I've dealt with a lot of ZBAs who kind of give variances out like candy. And both you and the ZBA you're in hard positions. Because you're in a position where a lot of times you're having to say no to your neighbors about the most emotional and financial thing in their lives. So kudos to you for sitting up there because it's a hard job. So those variances are a literal application of the zoning regulations, and they're usually tied to area, size, height requirements. Anyone from the ZBA want to share the oddest variance you ever saw?
Nothing comes to mind.
Nothing comes to mind? Our offices are in the city of Ann Arbor, and we got a notice of a variance for something across the street. They asked for a 50-foot height variance. I thought, wow, that is brave. And I don't know what the city of Ann Arbor ZBA did. I hope they said no.
Well, we have dealt with inches or fractions of an inch, and
Okay.
that maybe doesn't seem that odd, but yeah, there was one. Most all of this occurs around the lakes because things are kind of tight to lot lines, neighbor to neighbor, and I think there was one where when they took the tape measure to somebody's chimney, you know, down like ground level, it was whatever, but it jutted out a little bit and they needed to get another like 2.5 inches or 1 3/4 inches or something like that because of the little jog in it. It just seems kind of odd in a way.
Mhm. But, well, inches to feet, it all matters. If you're on the ZBA, I'm sure you know that all the decision criteria in section 2906C must be met. But also use variances are prohibited. So if a use is not listed in the zoning ordinance, it's prohibited. Or if a use is listed, but it's just not in the zoning district where somebody would like to have that use. The only way that changes is if the zoning ordinance changes. And I mentioned that consolidation of those 3 acts. It used to be, I think, that townships could always they had the choice of whether to approve use variances or not, but villages couldn't. And so when they combined all those acts, they allowed use variances to still be a tool, but said they were highly discouraged. So when you're going into these decisions, some general zoning principles to keep in mind are that you are really balancing the rights of the public versus the rights of the individual. The individual is allowed the reasonable use of their property and a reasonable economic return, but you're also balancing what those impacts are. And I think you saw a lot of that when you were looking at those short-term rentals. And then what those impacts could be, and then where do they outweigh? And that main thing though also is the zoning ordinance must be fair and reasonable. It can't be arbitrary, and that's where a lot of things, if things go to court, they get caught up on. Probably the most recent thing that in the press that you may have heard of that's a zoning case is in Peninsula Township, up in near Traverse City. And I think it's the Leelanau Peninsula. They put a lot of restrictions on wineries in terms of when they could have things, how much, things like that, dealing with agritourism. And in what I've recently read in summaries is that the judge found it to be arbitrary and then imposed a very big fine. So,
Yeah, I think it was like 50 million.
it was 50 million, yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Also, a good master plan is a good defense in zoning limitations. That's another reason to keep it current, and also if you have a big thing change, to amend the zoning ordinance. And as a general rule, zoning ordinances shouldn't otherwise exclude lawful uses. Like I just talked about how Saline Township didn't have it planned or zoned for industrial anywhere in their township. So that was something, an example of exclusionary zoning, but you don't necessarily have to always offer every use. So when I first started out, there were a lot of manufactured housing communities that would come to townships like yours, and buy, have an option on a big piece of farmland, and they would say, we're going to put in a mobile home community. And really what they wanted to put in is with half the houses and have single family homes. But because that township hadn't planned or zoned for manufactured housing communities, they had an in. And they came immediately threatening to sue. So but sometimes you don't have places that are appropriate. So then what we do is look at the surrounding townships and to say, okay, is there affordable housing there that services the needs? And then you can also look for that in terms of some other uses that have those impacts. And one big exception to this rule is, it is, gravel pits, but there are certain laws around those that you have to look at. So in terms of zoning principles, procedure matters. So adhere to that letter of requirements of the MZA and your local zoning ordinance. And your zoning ordinance really is good in terms of, I think it spells things out well in a clear manner. You have standards for every decision. Require those applicants seeking relief to follow procedure, especially in a small community. It may be easy to say, oh, it's Janice. I know Janice. She'll be great. It's fine. She doesn't need to do that. No, they gotta treat Janice and everybody else the same. And also to deal with zoning issues in a prompt manner. Time is money, and especially for folks who are looking to build something or develop something, they might be carrying 2 different properties and the tax burden. And also any of you who are involved in building know that in Michigan, if you miss certain windows, you're delayed for a whole year. Make sure all your decisions are made in open meetings. So you may go to Friendsgiving and somebody asks you about the site plan that's coming up on the planning commission docket. Don't give your opinion, tell them where to get information about it and where it is, but, and especially if 2 of you are at Friendsgiving together, don't talk about the site plan. And then don't express an opinion regarding that until all the facts have been received in an open meeting. And because if you do so otherwise, you're depriving the applicant of the ability to hear your input, have a fair hearing, and then you're inviting litigation. And I know a lot of this is talking about how to protect yourself from litigation, but that's one of the things that you're doing and need to be aware of. Also make sure that it's supported by competent evidence. So create a good record, make sure you have good minutes. I know that you all read them in detail, and that is great. Also, experts are invaluable. I know that's a bit of self-promoting, but it may not necessarily be the planning consultant. Oftentimes it's to involve the township attorney early. And then that's much more helpful than at the end. And also, I found here to involve your engineer, especially with anything dealing with stormwater. They've been really good in terms of problem solving, to help to get to a place where it meets the law, but it's also not necessarily terribly cost burdensome for the applicant. All right. How's everybody feeling? Do you need to get up, move? No one's falling asleep? All right, roles and responsibilities. So you get to recommend the master plan, but you get to do the majority of the work. Township board chose to be the approving body, so they're gonna approve it. For the zoning ordinance, again, you're a recommending body, so that's for any text amendments or conditional rezonings or rezonings. Site plan review, special land use, and PUD, you are the approving body. All 3 of those, the buck stops with you. You have preliminary and final site plan reviews. Special land uses, usually it's preliminary and special land use happen at the same time, and then final happens later. And then planning unit development, I haven't gone through with one of those with you, so I don't know the process, but I'm assuming again, it's a preliminary and a final. Where then you are the approving body, but that preliminary and final is really good in that you can then at the preliminary weigh in on design, weigh in on landscaping, make decisions about waivers that then the applicant go forward and give you something that not only meets the zoning ordinance, but also meets the expectations of the community. Right, in terms of making effective decisions, are you finding out for a PUD?
I was just looking, I just went through the site plan review process.
Mhm.
It's a great process. You have the ability to approve both, and also the ordinance gives the ability to combine the two, which is a fun little, yeah.
Mhm. So, we group your responsibilities and decisions into 4 stages as you're going through the process. So think of these as moments in time and what you need. So first, the information comes in, so this is the initial contact. Usually that's through the Director of Planning and Zoning. But I've seen it where you all have been emailed, right? One of you has been emailed, or a member of the township board has been emailed about how do we do this? And usually then that would come to the Director of Planning and Zoning. Sometimes it's come to me as your planning consultant. I think this is a great hint, never answer questions from memory. I know I always, if I'm on the phone with somebody, or I'm gonna email them, I pull up the zoning ordinance, I look at it, I double check it, because I wanna make sure I'm giving them the right information. Also note all contacts, and then share them with your Director of Planning and Zoning, share them, and then, they need to go through all the application forms, the process. Again, I know that you're very good at this, only accept complete applications and adhere to those application deadlines. It's just gonna make your life easier. A lot of times you'll have somebody come and be like, please, like, I don't have all. If you don't make good decisions when you have incomplete information. So when, in terms of that information, make sure you have all the application materials, read those materials, and do a site visit. When you're there though, try to avoid contact with the applicant. That's called ex parte contacts. If it happens at the beginning of your meeting, when you asked if you had any conflicts, also, that's the time to say, I had an ex parte contact. I had contact with the applicant, or so-and-so who I didn't, developer called me. I didn't realize who it was when I took the call. I said this and then this, and then you guys, then using your bylaws, you can decide whether somebody needs to step down or not. Not step down from the board, but just be abstain from that decision. When you're getting into decisions and deliberation, in order for Planning Commissioner Straub, I've seen you do a great job as chair. If you feel that Chair Birch was your mentor, then I'm sure he's gonna do great and is not gonna let meetings get out of control. I've seen people like bring site plans to the Planning Commission and a pen and are marking it up like right in front of the chair and asking if this is okay. And the chair is saying, well, I think so. What do you think, Marge? Like, so you're really, and especially because you're being broadcast and then the videos are saved. They're on YouTube forever. So think about a degree of formality. All comments need to run through the chair. Limit speaking time. And when you've had public hearings, you do that. I think it's 3 minutes. And then limit the number of times speaking. That's the other thing. Is like people are like, wait, I didn't get to say what I wanted again. And then also allowances for our spokesperson. In terms of when you all are speaking, again, comments through the chair. I think I've seen chairs loosen it up a little so that you could have a good back and forth. But just to be aware that your chair's in charge and respected. Also to deliberate in the open. So if you disagree with somebody else, that's fine. Have that conversation. And then and that goes into expressing your opinions, but again, using those ordinance standards for decisions. So the opinion of all the neighbors hate it, I'm going to vote no. on a site plan is not using those ordinance standards for decisions. You could say, I hear that everyone hates it. However, if it meets the rules, we are bound to do this, or whatnot. Or there might be a rule that you feel that they don't meet.
Because that's actually happened.
Okay.
The time I've been on here, where somebody has proposed something. And, you know, even we maybe not like it, and the neighbors don't like it, you know, we're like, but this is, it doesn't really fit in with the rural nature of the township, is, you know, expressed by the opinions of the people that, you know, had input in the master plan. But it does meet the standards, so we had to approve it. And I feel like that's a real sort of yin and yang that you really just can't resolve, other than you have to approve it.
Yeah, well, and yes, but
However, if the reason that we had to approve it but didn't feel good about it is due to a deficiency in our zoning ordinance, then it's not gonna do us any good this time around, but for next time around, we ought to fix that.
you stole my thunder. Yeah, and I think some of the circumstances that you've dealt with have been difficult in that it may have been a particular actor. And that was problematic. Or I know with the cluster regulations, that has gave a little unease in some instances, but state law requires that cluster option where you leave 50% open space.
Are you talking
So-
about like Delansky? Or,
That, I mean, to me, that was, when I walked in here, that was the main thing
Yeah.
that everybody was upset about.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what, one of the things I was thinking about, and also the, which we did approve, but it never went anywhere, was that car lot on the corner of, but, which ended up getting built down by the party store.
Yeah, it's down in, I
Right.
think, Webster Township now.
Yeah. Which I think is a much better place for it, so.
Mhm. But then if you're uncomfortable with that car lot, then maybe car lot isn't the right use to be in there. Maybe that moves to a different zone, an industrial zone or something like that. And like, I just had an instance in Brandon Township where they said no to a gas station. And it was a special land use. And one of the reasons they said was, well, because it's adjacent to residential. Well, it was zone C1. And I said, well, maybe you should consider that you don't have gas stations in C1, you allow gas stations in C3, but not in C1. Because C1's always gonna be next to residential. Like, is there ever a circumstance where that wouldn't be right? So sometimes it's changing the ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
All right. When you make a motion, who made it, who seconds it, the request, the action, conditions, support for the decision related to review standards. And I've seen you do really good jobs at this, so keep it up. And also that Janice or somebody else repeats the motion so everybody's clear on what it is. Because when you get on your fifth motion, everybody's head's spinning a little and you may not necessarily remember what you're voting for. So even just to take that pause and then to have the motion repeated before you vote. Those motions, again, be clear, proper form, finding of fact, which is every planner's delight. Any additional informal documentation, if you can cite letters, if you can cite reports. But at the end of the day, just follow your proper process, have a plan and stick to it. Come in with patience. Not everything may happen in your term. You may have come into the planning commission with a certain agenda, or I've met planning commissioners who they came in because a development happened in their backyard that they didn't like. And then, how things developed over time is, it sometimes also with certain things like, in urban areas, backyard chickens, it takes 2 or 3 times for people to adopt things. And then again, that goes to that persistence. And then when you have opportunities to implement the plan, take them because sometimes they don't always come along. All right, that was everything on planning and zoning essentials. We'd like to take a break before data centers or keep pushing. I know I've been talking for almost an hour.
It's your pleasure.
I would like to drink the water.
The discretion of the chair, we will reconvene at 7:15. Mason McKenna, would you?
Sure. The planning commissioners had requested a little background on a data center, so I know you had a large amount of reading in your packet. I trust that you all did it. I'm gonna hit the highlights of these. And then I also trust that you have a lot of questions. I know that your planning and zoning director had a couple for you too that he posed in his memo. So in terms of what a data center is that it's a physical room, building, or facility that houses IT infrastructure for building, running, or delivering application or services. The major components are its computing equipment, so servers, data storage, networking, power supply, that they have it's regular through the grid, but there's also backups. And then cooling and environmental controls to keep the equipment cool and regulate humidity and security. And that can be physical security, building fences, lights, but also virtual security. There are lots of types. Actually, in our office, we have a closet that has 5 servers stacked on top of each other. That's a data center. And there are data centers often, there's a data center definitions often in zoning ordinances, not in yours, I don't think. But they were really geared towards data centers that were coming in the 2000s. And usually they were just small office buildings. So now we have these different levels that we've grouped them into in terms of internal, and those are small or medium, and they're generally run by enterprises internally for their own use, like our server closet at Carlisle Wortman. There's these edge data centers, which are small or medium, and they're located closer to those end consumers who use cloud-based networking. They're part of a network, and that proximity helps with data-intensive computing, like big data analytics. There's co-location data centers. Those can be small, medium, or large, and they're built and operated by a company that leases physical space or virtual space within the data center. And the tenants sometimes install and maintain their own servers within the leased space. The ones that you're seeing that are coming to Michigan and have been in the news are mostly these co-location data centers on a large scale, except for the one in Ypsilanti Township that's owned by University of Michigan. And then there's a hyperscale data center, and they are built and owned by major technology companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. So in terms of industry's trend, just look at this map and those hyperscale and those co-location in the blue. Look at how between 2016 and 2026, how much more blue there is. Before, a lot of it was the internal or the smaller ones. So the size of these are growing. And in terms of this national data center development, there's a lot in the ones in orange, their megawatts it's going to need to grow, but the ones where we are in blue, that's their current megawatts. And so we're in MISO in terms of our section of the grid in Michigan. And not only with these land uses, the thing to keep in mind is they're looking for locations, but they also need to have a certain amount of energy that they pull off the grid. And if it's that big of a share, it needs to go through MISO and make sure that it needs to go through these other regulatory agencies on that utility scale. And in terms of MISO, again, the region that we're in, if you're looking at this, the data centers are in blue, the blue rectangles with the black highlight. You can see that that's scaling up from the 2004 is blank. Can I do that? No. 2004 is blank, so 2005, 2006, you can see how it's keeping growing in looking for it to scale up by significant growth within the next 20 years. State of Michigan enacted these sales, use, and tax exemptions, and that's one of the reasons that we have this, what may, I feel like to me, the sudden wave of data centers coming through, is that they have sales and use tax exemptions for data center equipment. One of the things is that they turn over their servers all the time. And so it used to be under Michigan law, one of the things that this affected was that it exempted them assessing and upping the personal property tax every time they switched out servers. So there is still some property tax that comes through it, but it's just, our property tax is more built for car companies or an auto plant. When you switch out a big machine, then that didn't happen all the time or as often as a server did, and the tax was treating it in the same way. But this was also to attract these types of developments to Michigan. So these are the things that the tax legislature is saying is that it's valid through those sales and tax exemptions for data center equipment. They're valid through 2050. 2065 is developed in a brownfield. A minimum capital investment of 250 million, creation of at least 30 jobs at 150% of an annual wage, and achieve green building standards. So the basics of power supply and regulations, and my colleague Mike Auerbach put this together, and he is much more familiar with this. So if you have pressing questions, I'm going to do my best to answer them, but I might also say, I'm going to get with Mike and email you an answer. So again, at state regulations, we have the Michigan Public Services Commission, and they oversee retail electricity purchases, specifically DTE and consumers. There's the regional wholesale markets. And so again, that's the MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, and PGM. And then you have federal oversight. In Michigan, the MPSC monitors electricity production and capacity on an annual basis, and each utility needs to demonstrate to them every year their planning year for 4 years. And so that's where they set the load obligations. And then every year they know how much energy they need, how much energy they're drawing, and whatnot. In terms of, there's a long-term integrated resource plans, and then all the utilities must prepare that's reviewed every 5 years. That has a reliable, cost-effective electric service to customers while addressing risk and uncertainty. Typically, it's a 20-year time frame, and they have to use certain parameters. The current integrated plan has a business as usual scenario, and it assumes that it's just what the status quo is. Emerging technologies, that analyzes that potential impact of emerging technologies in terms of response, energy waste reduction, large and small scale storage, as well as solar. There's an environmental policy scenario that's only applicable in the Lower Peninsula, and looking at carbon regulations and modeled by placing a hard cap on the amount of carbon emissions. And then there's the high market price variant, also applicable only to Upper Peninsula utilities, and evaluates the impact of the expected natural gas and energy. So the big thing with data centers is always, these are about water, that they're very, very water consumptive. And really it depends on the data center size, its cooling density, and the type of cooling. And I will say, the kind of preview when we're talking about planning, this is something that you could regulate as the local municipality in your zoning. You could ask them for how much water they're taking in, what they're going to do with it, things like that. And also you could only allow certain cooling configurations that don't use as much water. And there are some that actually don't. So you can go back to this, and I'm not going to go through this line by line, but from what I've heard either from my colleagues I've had colleagues who have been on the municipality side at CWA, at Howell Township, Village of Dundee, because they would be providing the water, on the one that's proposed there. And then Saline Township and Sumter Township. All of those were not going to use water cooling. They were gonna use a vapor system. And the one in Saline was gonna use a closed loop system. And then the presentation that I went to and Fletcher went to at Michigan Association of Planning, they had somebody there who's from the industry said that they were really moving away as much as possible from water cooling. Especially for these bigger sites, but that wasn't always possible. And so you can see here in this graphic, the gray is direct expansion. You can see for small and mid-size, that's really where most of the cooling, that's the cooling type that's used, the cooling system. But then as we get bigger, they start to be air side accommodators and high bucket cooling. So air cooled is the dark red. And then air side water cooled chiller is the pinkish. And the blues and the AI specialized that are taking up the top three that are taking up a lot of room are IT liquid cooling, three types of IT liquid cooling, but there were air cooled chillers, which doesn't take, from what I understand, as much water, but again, there's a lot of things that are going into here that I'm not as familiar with. In terms of the air cooling, those have less space, they're lower on water consumption, and they're lower in terms of maintenance. But the water cooling can be more efficient and use less electricity, and that is attractive to the folks running the data centers, because the more electricity you have, the more that goes into the computer servers and the product that they're selling, rather than the maintenance of the facility. And just to keep in mind that the overall energy, water, space depend on a whole bunch of different factors, including the equipment types, the configuration, and the environment. And those equipment types and those configuration, those might change over time too within the building. We talked about that with battery storage, so those might be good questions to ask, or things, regulations to have your arms around. A big thing with this is noise, and you read a lot of things from especially Northern Virginia, where there have been quite a few of these. So they have relatively constant noise sources with the cooling equipment and the immense amount of HVAC, also the transition lines and the substations. And then they have backup generators. And so those are tested every so often, at least once a month. So those are intermittent sounds. So the equipment can be as loud as 80 to 100 dBA. And so if you're looking at the side graphic, a jet at takeoff at 200 feet is 130 decibels. A lawnmower is 90 decibels. And then 85 decibels and above is harmful to human hearing, and 60 decibels is a conversation between two people at 3 feet. The noise can be mitigated through data design, center siding, design barriers, and conventional sound barriers. And also, quite frankly, again, from the session that we heard, this is one of the reasons they're looking for very large pieces of property. Is because they know that there's that sound, that noise, and it's also for security as well. So planning considerations. As always, have that conversation early. And I commend you all for wanting to have that conversation. We look to educate, analyze, and plan in your master plan. During the break, Fletcher and I were talking about, if that's an option, is for you to amend the master plan. One thing to look at is, do you want to, if that's the route you want to go, would you want to do it just for this, or would you want to do it for some other critical uses that have come before you or might be here in terms of renewable energy, because those cite in the same, in the same way, they both wanna, the data centers and the renewable energy wanna be near transmission lines. So adopt, update your master plan, but also update your zoning ordinance. Our company right now is in the process of, making a model ordinance, we're having it vetted by lawyers now. So that would be something I would anticipate, that we could share within the next month or so. And might be a good starting point, but there also might be, complete respect if you wanted to, go a different route. In that master plan, to have a community dialogue, but also to identify locations that are appropriate and those that are not. Again, in that side conversation that Fletcher had, he brought up prime agricultural soils. This type of use is not like a wind farm where you could continue to farm underneath it, or maybe like solar where you could definitely get those soils back. These are pretty big buildings. And so, that might be something where you would say, this is, if it's prime farmland, we're not interested in it coming there. And again, appropriate might depend on the size of the data center and the type of equipment. And again, you could regulate in terms of scale. Using metrics, again, those, as I mentioned, proximity to transmission lines, and here we go, just farmland and vacant property. But also whether the contiguous parcels are under the same ownership. This is a little different than the renewable energy where they're looking to lease from, the renewable energy folks were fine with leasing from 20 people. In this case, for the data centers, they're looking to buy, and probably from a limited amount, a handful of people. Terms of what you use, again, we talked about soils and prime farmland and looking at those as a good start. Also water resources, and that existing industrial residential. So make sure that if you were having data centers, they were well far away or well buffered, from adjacent residential. So if you had a large tract near a power line, but near a lakefront neighborhood, that would probably not be the best place to, that would probably be more appropriate to say that it was not appropriate there. If we get into zoning, absolutely have definitions and have them at scale. And look at, and look at districts, what those application requirements are, and specifically providing equipment specifications, and then a sound study pre and post development, reviewing the process and also performance standards. This might also be another place where I know people have talked about decommissioning, and asking for loans for those. Because I think one of the reports said, we're in an AI bubble. And so what's to prevent these from going out of business, and then we're stuck with them. And that, I'm done.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Ms. Mason Minnick, does anyone, planning commission, have any questions for Ms. Mason Minnick at this time?
Really?
Hearing
I-
none?
I-
No.
So when you went to this, when you were hearing the person from the industry speak, did they give you any indication of their sense when these things might be obsolete? Did they say they're not gonna be obsolete? Because they seem to take up a tremendous amount of space, the big ones, so.
The gentleman representing the industry, and then, He said they're not going to go obsolete. And in his opinion, because, and he had developed, been part of a company that developed them all over the world. For Google and Microsoft and whatnot, and so he had seen how they had grown. And just, you know, in his opinion, it seemed like, that they were almost an essential service. Which I will say my colleague, pushed back on, that it was not an essential service, nor was it defined as an essential service in the zoning ordinance, so it shouldn't be treated that way. But in their opinion, these were not going away. And he didn't feel like they were speculative.
Sure. Just to follow up on that question, did he indicate how old the oldest data center is? Kind of let us bracket whatever the obsolescence may be that he doesn't recognize.
About a couple decades,
Okay,
they've gotten larger.
They've gotten larger, much larger. Yeah.
thank you.
Have we heard any rumors about anything coming to Dexter Township?
No,
Okay.
I haven't gotten any correspondence. Any signs of interest from companies who construct data centers. But like Megan said, it's good to plan for these future land uses, so we're not caught flat-footed in the event that doesn't.
And I think they are looking for water and sewer, or at least water, to make sure that it's a reliable source with pressure.
Township does utilize well. Megan and I have talked about this before, but we are unsure that a data center would be able to accommodate all their cooling needs with a well system. However, like the presentation had showed, there's other technological advancements happening with cooling systems, so that may not be a concern in the coming decades. But as of now, sewer is spread out around the lakes, and well is the predominant water resource or water method in the township.
Mr. Air, did you have a formal presentation that you wanted to share with us?
I think ultimately, the planning department wanted to get this conversation started. And, we wanted to get the planning commission's opinion on where you'd like to see this go, whether it's taking a look at the master plan, potentially amending that, for this technology of the future. Taking a look at our zoning ordinance and defining this technology and adding developmental standards in the event where data center comes to the township. And like Megan has said, Carlisle Oregon is currently working on a framework ordinance that should be ready in the coming months. We could take a look at that and use that as a beginning framework for this conversation.
Thank you, sir. Members of the planning commission, does anyone have any thoughts or preferences how we proceed on this issue?
I have one more question.
Ms. Meyer?
Are these generally in places that are zoned industrial or are they zoned commercial? Or does it vary?
Industrial.
Yeah.
The township currently does not have any industrially zoned properties. Do have commercially zoned properties. One of these supplemental materials in the packet talked about how some communities around the country have put these data centers under bulk uses, such as warehouses. But as we know, a data center is much different than just storing pallets or products in a building. They're servers that produce a lot of heat and take a lot of electricity to power.
And don't have nearly the traffic that a warehouse would, or the jobs.
If there's that economic impact as well, it's not a large employer.
Um,
Oh,
I was just gonna
oh, yeah,
say,
I'm sorry.
in the past several years, my own household electricity has gotten more reliable. Cause we had a bunch of outages like in the early, like 2020 to 2022. But Michigan, I think as a whole, doesn't have the most reliable grid. So how is the state as a whole thinking about encouraging this with tax breaks, but yet having a not particularly effective grid?
Well, the representative from DTE on the panel that we sat in on said that it was in his, DTE looked at these companies coming in as then enabling DTE to make the grid more reliable across the way, across their entire service area. And explained how it wouldn't make anyone's rates higher. And then basically kind of said, then they would have more money, a steady stream that they knew that they could invest around to make that grid stable overall.
Is that all, Ms. Meyer?
What is it?
No, thank you. Any other comments, questions, members of the planning commission? Mr. Ryer, I feel very strongly that this is going to be an animal that if we don't deal with, it will come in to bite us. I would like to make a formal request to ask you to contact our township attorney and at our next planning commission meeting, have her give us some guidance that as we proceed down this road, I want to keep Dexter Township from getting into the same situation that Saline did and ended up having to basically capitulate because they attempted to do something that was on the face of it seen as not defensible. Mr. Straub.
Just for timing purposes, would you want to do that before or after Carlisle Wortman has their like model ordinance available?
Excellent question, Mr. Straub, but because I think we are probably going to be discussing this at our next meeting, whether or not Carlisle Wortman has their information available. I think the township attorney addressing this issue will give us some guidance on where general direction we want to go and general direction that we want to stay away from.
All right, thank you.
Sir.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Berry.
I just wonder this, is there a way for us to investigate or find information regarding how the industry rates townships or areas in terms of their attraction to the industry? So we could better evaluate our own risk if we had some handle on that.
Excellent question, sir. And I'm going to appeal to our planning zoning administrator and our consultant to maybe get that answer for us. Ms. Mason McKinnick, can you?
Yep, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Agreed. Before we proceed on the path, we've got to at least define the animal. And that would be an excellent place to start. further comments or questions? Mr. Smith?
I have several questions, but I think a lot of them will be answered through this discovery process. One of them is exactly what, I'm so bad with last names, with Commissioner Berry had suggested, which is understanding the risk. And part of that in my little notes was, where are our transmission lines? You know, what are the prime locations in our township that we think they might be looking to understand what that impact could be? I'm trying not to draw judgment too quickly and form an opinion early. So I think it's good to be bringing this additional information. But I do think we need to do something regardless of what the final outcome is, as far as at least defining it and addressing, or at least getting the categories created so that we have a way. Because we don't have current industrial. I did notice that in a few of the documents, they mentioned brownfield remediation sites as sometimes being used to get those longer duration approvals, which I don't think we really have. So I don't know that we have sort of those target elements that are at least talked about in this level of documentation. But again, it's just being aware of which areas we think they might, if they wanted to, where they would start.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and maybe to address one of your questions, we do have a major high voltage transmission line basically parallel with Dexter Town Hall Road. And we also have a new substation at the new fire station. How, if at all, they may play with the advent of a data center, I have no clue, and I'm not going to suggest. However, I will tell you personally, right now, I am very ambivalent as to whether or not a data center will be attractive to Dexter Township. But I think it behooves us as a planning commission to make those decisions and then prepare ourselves should one be solicited for our township.
If
Mr. Stroh.
Just further to your comments, we also have transmission lines north-south in the township. So you know, we've got, for our size, maybe we've got more acreage in proximity to transmission lines than some other locations, but we also have the huge power substation, Majestic Station on Madden Road that is quite significant. Now, whether we have the rest of the infrastructure that would make us attractive, I guess we'll learn as we go along.
Thank you, Mr. Stroh. Mr. Ryer, did you have a comment, sir?
I had another question.
Ms.
Mr.
Meyer.
Chair, in terms of I think it was suggested earlier that we might want to look at the master plan. Do you know if there's any examples of master plans that have been amended to address this? And what they might say, and is that something that might be covered in your upcoming draft ordinance, or?
The draft ordinance wouldn't cover what would be in there for a draft master plan, but I imagine some places in Virginia changed their master plan based on that, so.
And in the interest of full disclosure this evening, when this meeting finishes, I am on my way to Frankenmuth for 2 days of planning and zoning retreat with planning and zoning personnel from all over the state. So naturally, I'm going to be looking for answers for our questions, and should I come up with anything, I will be able to share that with you next meeting.
Mr. Chair, I had
Mr. Smith.
my last question. You in the presentation or in the data center thing that you guys attended, it sounded like the industry people were sort of treating it like a critical service or whatever the word is for those things that get defined as critical services. Takes away some of the ability and the power that we as a commission have. And so I guess one question would be getting an understanding of whether or not there is a push for these types of facilities to become defined as a critical service. And if so, then I feel we should make sure we have very clear opinions and thoughts stated and built into our documents. And I'm thinking of the gas lines that came through. You know, all of a sudden, we didn't have a lot of choice with what was happening there. We already don't have a lot of choice of what's happening with the power. And if these are just being bundled together, and we have both in our township, then we should just be aware of whether or not that could be looming.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Hurd, do you have any comments, questions?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Spiegel, have we answered any of your questions, or do you have anything further you would like to request from us?
It's a delicate subject. Experts, attorneys may represent a significant industry or category of businesses. We should be extremely sensitive to from whom we're getting advice on these particular issues. I don't know the answer to that. But in today's environment, we should be careful with a variety of opinions. As Fletcher pointed out, the University of Michigan, starting on page 91, was significantly different than the material between pages 51 and 90 in their approach. That's all I'd like to say, and I don't know how we can address that, or when I say we, how you all can address that. I'm just pointing out that there are two sides to a story. There's sometimes some inherent bias, and that's a very sensitive issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spiegel. I would either the other members of the general public care to address the commission on this issue. Seeing none. Any further questions or comments from members of the planning commission? Or our planning and zoning department? Hearing none, I am going to close the public discussion on data centers, and we will move to the next item in the agenda this evening. Okay, which would be the approval of the planning commission minutes of September 23rd, 2025.
Sure.
Mr. Trump?
I've got a couple of comments / corrections I'd like to make. So on the second page, under item 12, concerns of commission members, blah, 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 starts out Straub. Couple of lines down. I would like to strike the sentence that says the election of officers should have been included in the notification. As I recall, the election of officers was included as an agenda item in the public notification, purpose of which was actually to give notification for the public hearing. And I think what I said is that it did not need to have been included. You know, no other agenda item needed to be included in notification of the public hearing. Our only statutory responsibility was to publish the public hearing. So it'd just be cleaner rather than to try to clean up the wording and whatever, the statement as it stands is incorrect. I just like to strike it rather than fix it. And then, the next line down, DPC Ryer Dexter Gates is completed. I think we should clarify, I think that was the consumers Dexter Township City Gate out on Territorial, right? We should probably just give some more clarification to that. You know, sometime in the future, somebody reading these minutes may not understand what Dexter Gates is. I would prefer it to say consumers. The heck are they? Consumers Energy? It's not Consumers Power. Consumers Energy, Dexter Township City Gate Station work has been completed.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Any other corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, we'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of September 23rd as amended.
I move approval of the September 23rd minutes as amended.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Straub, seconded by Mr. Barry to approve the minutes of September 23rd as amended. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Motion carries. Next item on our agenda this evening will be the any correspondence which we may have received. Mr. Ryer?
Correspondence, please.
More correspondence. Thank you, sir. Next item, Township Board of Trustees update. As Ms. Abbott is not here, we can dispense with the Township Board of Trustees update. We move now to the concerns of Planning Commission members, Director of Planning and Zoning, Township Supervisor, and Recording Secretary. Starting at my left, Mr. Smith?
None.
Mr. Smith has none. Ms. Hurd?
I have none.
Ms. Hurd has none. Ms. Meyer?
I have no concerns. I just have to say thank you for the training and for the information on the data centers. I thought it was all very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Meyer. Mr. Barry?
None, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Mr. Straub?
I have a couple, thank you. Number one, I will not be here for the November 22nd meeting. That being scheduled, and Thanksgiving week, I will not be around. And I think it was November 22nd, did I state that correctly?
That's Saturday.
Hmm?
It's November 22nd. It's a Saturday.
25th, is that right? Yeah, 22nd might be my travel plans. And then the second issue, which I think we should take up on some future agenda, which I had forgotten about until Commissioner Meyer mentioned that in our earlier conversation this evening. One of the things that I think some of us found frustrating or less than satisfying, let's say, in the approval of the development that was mentioned is that once the applicant met all of the requirements, yeah, we had to give it approval. But it still seems like it seemed to me that there was a conflict in our stated goals and objectives. Our current master plan came after that, but you know, historically, our goals and objectives in the previous master plan, the township board's desire was to retain kind of the rural character of Dexter Township. And there was no provision for the planning commission to require that any of that be shielded from view. So yeah, we need to put houses someplace, and it looks like that's going to be real nice. But anybody driving down North Territorial, in particular, Dexter Town Hall Road, same issue, just lesser amount of traffic. You're going to see backyards of a lot of homes, and that could have been blocked from view with some required landscaping had our zoning ordinance and specifically the open space overlay district requirements accounted for that. So I just think it's something taking up. I'm not aware that we've got anything coming at us, which would be the time to get ahead of that and, you know, see if we want to make a recommendation that the zoning ordinance is more explicit about that topic.
Thank you, Mr. Straub. Excellent suggestion. As our township supervisor is not with us this evening, Ms. Miller, as recording secretary, do you have any comments or concerns?
Not tonight, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Next item will be any public comment on non-agenda items. It appears that we have a unanimous no. So proceeding right along, future agenda items. Planning Commission discussion of the bylaws, particularly Article 5, officer selection. I am somewhat supportive and the source of this request. I believe our bylaws should be changed to where if the chair resigns his or her appointment, that the vice chair accedes automatically to the chair position. Our bylaws are not explicitly clear on that, and I would like to resolve that particular issue. Secondly, the review and discussion of the Township Board September 16th, 2025 recommendations regarding short-term rentals and bed and breakfasts. Mr. Ryer, we have that on our agenda for next month.
Yes.
Thank you. And the third item we have here for future agenda items is, again, one, I am the source of this, a discussion about establishing a master plan review committee to meet quarterly to discuss the implementation of master plan action plan, and to evaluate potential revisions or updates. The township is required to periodically review the master plan and to determine whether to amend, readopt, or prepare a new plan. And Ms. Minnick, I'm sorry.
Minnock is fine. Just say Miss Minnock.
Ms. Minnock's presentation this evening, we are aware of the general context of updating our master plan. I was chair at the time our master plan was supposed to have been updated last time, the 5-year point. And because of other things going on in the township, through benign neglect, it was pretty easy to ignore updating the master plan when we should have. Eventually it happened, but it was about 2 years late. What I am going to suggest, if I get concurrence from the Planning Commission, what I am going to suggest or request from the Township Board is that we fund a standing committee to review the master plan on probably a quarterly basis with just my first suggestion, the committee being comprised of 2 members of the Planning Commission, one of whom would be chair of the committee, a member of the Township Board, not necessarily the member that is representing the Township Board at the Planning Commission, and 2 members of the general public, and this committee to be a paid committee who would be responsible for a quarterly meeting to evaluate what is happening in the township and to make recommendations to us as to whether or not they feel that a revision of the master plan is desirable or necessary. Part of this is precipitated by the actions now of the potential for a data center, but I know there are other considerations of the master plan that I have heard comments in these meetings could be improved. So anyway, that is why that item is on our future agenda. And I would like Mr. Ryer for this to be specifically addressed at our next meeting. Whether or not we want to support the chair in a request to the township board to fund a standing committee for this purpose. And thank you. That is all I have. Does anyone else have anything they care to bring up before the planning commission this evening? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I'll support, Mayor.
Moved by Straub, supported by Meyer to adjourn. The meeting is over.